how do you manage that overwhelming wave of data? How do you manage all of the different types of services? You almost are mandated to start changing the core of the network to get ready for that.
If you look at the way that networks are evolving, it's moving everything towards the cloud. So of course we have to focus on software as a key element of the mix.
Of maximum importance for us to keep the standards evolving in the best way.
We should work together on that standardization, that interoperability, and kind of feed off of each other to drive that innovation cycle.
You got to make sure that you're embarking on a transformation on the people front as well as process front.
Service providers, over-the-top guys, application providers, car manufacturers, all these verticals, we're going to have to work closer and closer.
A lot of our customers are standing up voice over LTE for the first time. We've got a simple choice. Am I going to buy a box to do that the old-fashioned way, which will become a boat anchor in 5 years' time? Or am I going to license a piece of software and deploy it on standard off-the-shelf hardware, in which case it'll live forever in my network? It's a very simple and easy choice to make at that point.
Drive some of this standardization, but leverage that NFV platform, whether it's virtual network functions onboarding or federations or API standards, etc. So we become more software centric. And as we all know, software is king. That's the way to success.
Okay, I'm going to throw this open now to the floor. We have a roving microphone somewhere, maybe even two, I don't know. But if you would like to ask this panel any questions, and this isn't the sort of panel you find under a bush in the Buena Yoba Gardens or anything like that. It's an unusual collection of people, and they have a great deal of knowledge and information to impart. So don't be shy. Has anybody got any questions? If you don't, I've got plenty left. Andrew Coward. Of course you have. Go on then. Where's the... It's on its way around.
Thank you. Good evening, panel. My question to the panel is, what does the panel see as the value of open source in the vendor transformation? It seems like we're skirting around this, but we haven't actually talked about it specifically this evening.
Okay, I'll start. Just because Intel has participated in contributing to open source for, 15 years or so. It's been a long time. And we are one of the contributors to Linux kernel and OpenStack and at kind of a general compute level. One of the things that open source in general has allowed is a faster pace of innovation and a larger pool of developers. And one thing I continually hear from operators is, I can't recruit at Stanford like some of the other West Coast companies that are there. And so where are my software developers who know how to manage this fully virtualized automated environment coming from? And so one of the things that open source can do is accelerate the speed of innovation as well as give you access to a greater pool of developers with creative ideas. Notice that I didn't say it accelerates the speed of deployment because open source is open source. You haven't gone through all the commercialization and hardening. And so I think that it's an important nuance to understand. There's innovation, developer pool, very good. We participate in multiple projects that look like they overlap somewhat. We do that at Intel because we know we don't want to drive the suppliers and vendors crazy with all the fragmentation. So we participate in all of them and try and pull them together to at least a point of consistency, if not where they could pass the same compliance tests.
So from my perspective, if I may, I mean, I agree on the point that you made regarding the speed of innovation, right? Every open source project that we either joined or initiated very quickly, became a multi-vendor environment where the community added more features than we would have been able to do in that time frame. On the speed to market, I think it kind of depends, right? Because in some cases, we actually see adoption getting accelerated as well, because in some way it fixes the compatibility issue that we discussed before. The problem with that is that it's not uniform. So I can't, from a business perspective, count on the fact that, okay, if we do open source, then we would accelerate from 2 years to a year, or from a year to 6 months. Right? It really depends on the specific project and the construct of the open source environment as a whole. But just one little point that I always like to make when we talk about open source is to define what is really open source and what isn't. Because my definition of open source requires a certain adoption and a certain participation in contribution. There are too many, single vendor type of open source initiatives, which I would not put in, in that category, right? We need to have a true community contributing, right, into every project to call something open source. Yeah. So that's just my little comment at the end.
Yeah, I will have the same comment to emphasize that for us as CSPs, what is useful in an open source community is also this collective work between CSPs and between vendors, and potentially between integrators also. An app is a good example of that. That makes it a true interoperable and common solution. And so it helps also to stabilize, to settle the ecosystem. So, and as you said, if it's fake community and driven by a single actor, it's not so useful, it's not so efficient, and we miss part of the goal.
Apologies.
Excuse me.
I'm cautiously optimistic. Right, so I understand the theoretical benefits of this stuff, and I'm answering specifically for this domain, because Verizon contributes to other open source initiatives in different parts of its business, and we've seen benefit, but specifically in this domain, right? I get how it could help, I get the promise of how it could help, and I'm eagerly awaiting the arrival of the benefits, because I can't cash theoretical checks, right? And I can see a lot of stuff. I'd be repeating myself with a lot of things I think have to happen before some of this stuff starts to come to fruition. I think there's some basic building blocks that people have to get done to really see us be able to cash that check.
Thanks, Andrew. Anyone else? Gentleman here. We'll get to a mic to you.
I just want to comment on the...
sorry to interrupt. Just tell us where you're from and who you represent.
My name is Mehmet Toy. I'm with Verizon. I'm in
I thought you might have been, yeah.
So
okay.
I want to comment on the API, standards APIs. I agree with the comments that the standards API helps interoperability, plus the decoupling the layers, which means really hides the complexity underneath the layers. Now, given that there are open source, open platforms, there are various initiatives there. To me, they are not standards. They are going to help the standards. They should help us to come up with the standard APIs, rather than saying that I have an open platform, you got to follow me. So they should help us to establish the standard APIs. There is actually an initiative in the MEF. It's called the Open API Initiative, which is really working with all other SDOs to come up with a unique standard APIs. Hopefully we will be successful in that.
Any comments on that? It was a statement rather than a question, but are there any comments on it?
There are a lot of different places that you can reuse APIs. There's programmable web, there's GitHub. GitHub is kind of a combination of interfaces and code snippets. And so it's a pretty consistent methodology. I do think in this space that in some cases, people might have been holding back because they view the operators as, well, you tell us what APIs you need or what APIs make sense in your architecture, because you are solving different problems differently. And so if there's a desire to go into the organizations that are already running, I think that's a really good option.
We have time for one more question if anybody would like to ask one. It would seem not, in which case I am going to bring this to a conclusion by asking actually the audience. You know that they say vox populi, vox dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God, as we saw in our recent elections. And so I would like to ask you to vote. Well, just a straw poll looking around here, having listened to the debate for the past 40 minutes. Do you think the two camps here have come to some kind of an accommodation and they can reassure one another that the CSPs are in this for the long haul and understand the vendors have their own problems? And what about the vendors looking at the real needs of the CSPs, and are they meeting them? Who thinks that that accommodation has been reached in terms of this panel, and who thinks it hasn't? Let's start with who thinks it has. So, So, is there any point in... So, those who think it hasn't... Okay, looks like we've got a long way to go. But I'd just like to say it's been an absolutely fascinating debate, very enjoyable. I'm glad you two didn't thump each other. Really, thanks very, very much indeed. I would like to say thank you for being here. It's getting tremendously hot up here, isn't it?
Yes.
We are starting to melt. It's time to call a halt to it. So would you please show your appreciation for a great panel in the usual way?
The bear hug.
Go. Peace breaks out.
Oh, peace breaks
Thank
out.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.